Test cricketer Michael Slater has blasted Scott Morrison, claiming the PM has blood on his hands after banning flights from India. It comes as the Indian Premier League has been suspended amid the country's worsening COVID situation. For more on this, I'm joined from Brisbane by former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman and from Sydney, Renegade Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon. I know you love the Renegade, so we'll leave it in there every week for you, Joel. Campbell, I might start with you. Michael Slater, all of these criticisms, but he's now decamped to the Maldives. He's no longer in India. Do you think that perhaps undercuts his criticism if he's out there on one of those overwater bures and he's sitting back there and he's got plenty of money in his pocket? He's hardly doing it tough.
Well, that's as rough as you having a go at poor old Joel with this Renegade thing, Peter, but I'll move on. Look, I think he was entitled to try and get to a place of relative safety. But you know what, and I don't like the emotive language about blood on hands and racism that's being dealt out by some of the critics. But Peter, frankly, this is an issue that the federal and state governments should be doing a better job on in terms of bringing Australians home. It's the same issue. There are Australians trapped around the world who should be brought home, who are in poor economic circumstances. They need a proper plan. They need proper quarantine away from our capital cities, and have had 12 months to deal with it. I'm not just blaming the PM and the federal government. I'm saying the states and territories need to be part of the solution. But let's bring our Australians home. Otherwise, what does Australian citizenship mean?
I tell you what, you and I know that there are no premiers out there criticising the PM. So that tells you that around the National Cabinet table, Joel Fitzgibbon, it was a lot of these premiers who did not want flights coming in from India, and they demanded that there be health advice sought. Dr. Kelly was very clear to say he had been asked to provide advice to the National Cabinet. That advice comes in, it says pause the flights. They're all hiding behind the PM, but this comes down to the lack of faith these state premiers have in their hotel quarantine, doesn't it, Joel?
No, Peter, I couldn't disagree more. I agree with Campbell. I mean, Slater overreached, there's no doubt about that. I understand why the Prime Minister has taken the decision to stop flights from India, but I don't understand why he so escalated the situation to threaten to put people in jail if they got around the system. And none of this would be happening, Peter. None of this would be happening if the Prime Minister had followed Jane Halton's recommendations all those months ago and began to establish quarantine centres in remote locations in Australia. It wasn't good enough to tell the states or to have the states agree that they needed to take the weight of quarantining in capital city motels and hotels. It was always going to be problematic. And if the Commonwealth had engaged in quarantine early and invested the money, then we wouldn't be having an argument about people coming from India.
Yeah, but you and I know, and I wrote about this on the weekend, that the premiers were all happy on the forward side of their elections to keep quarantine there and beat their chest about how tough they were and keeping Australians out of their own states, let alone people from overseas. But as soon as they got past their election and they'd set this really high bar of 0 cases, and the only response they could have then was lockdowns, Campbell Newman, they were bloody quick, weren't they? Very quick to want to pass this off to the PM. They don't want a bar of it. It costs a lot of money, and there's a great political risk for these premiers. And other than Gladys Berejiklian, she's the only one who stares them down.
Gee, there's so much in that, Peter. I don't know where to begin. But look, the premiers have been playing this one, a very cute game for the last 12 months. But by the same token, again, I go back to, I do agree to a fair extent with what Joel's saying, that the Commonwealth with the states and territories should have established remote locations for quarantine away from our cities. And I can understand, because it is about local politics, why some of the proposals in Queensland, such as outside Gladstone and outside Toowoomba, haven't been accepted. That's all about those seats. So, I've always felt it made no sense at all to have quarantine in our major population centres, our capital cities. I mean, if it gets out, it's really got out and you've got a problem. So, look, I just wish that all get to the point of setting up these facilities in remote locations and, again, get a plan together to get our Australian citizens home.
I tell you what, if the coalition hadn't been so successful stopping the boats under Tony Abbott, there'd be all those Labor detention centres, Joel Fitzgibbon, just sitting there, all mothballed, ready to go. But they were too successful there, I think, ahead of this pandemic. I want to go to the issue of the Port of Newcastle.
That's the point. Scott Morrison often boasts that he turned back the boats. Now he's turning back the Aussies. And promising to put them in jail if they find a workaround. It's just a crazy situation.
Yeah, mate, but the very
anyway,
big difference there is the boat arrivals were not Australian citizens, and they were created rights the moment they stepped on Australian soil. What we're talking about here is Australian citizens.
Peter, why can't we? But Peter, why can't? That's the point. Why can't we?
Unauthorised arrivals.
Yeah. Why can't we set up these facilities? We could do it in a matter of a few weeks.
Well, we could, Campbell Newman. I'm not opposed to remote facilities to process returning travellers, but I tell you, I'm not going to take lectures from the Labor Party on border controls. I sat there and watched 50,000 of them come under your watch, Joel Fitzgibbon.